I never thought a simple trip could show me the truth about my own family. But that morning at Seattle Airport, I learned who I really was and what I was worth. If you've ever felt pushed aside by the people you love, listen closely. This story might be your story too. It was still dark when I woke. The rain had not stopped all night. Drops ran down the window like slow tears. I made coffee. The way I always did, 1 spoon of sugar, a little milk. The smell filled my small kitchen. I looked at the suitcase by the door and smiled. Today was the day. My son Michael had invited me on a family trip. Maui, sun, ocean, peace. I could almost hear the waves. For years I had dreamed of traveling again. After my husband Thomas died, I stayed home working in the garden, keeping quiet. When Michael called 3 weeks ago and said, "Mom, this time we want you with us," my heart jumped like it had learned to breathe again. I told everyone, my friend June, the ladies at church, even the mailman. "My boy still needs me," I said. They smiled. And I believed it. I spent days packing a coral dress, a new pair of white shoes, vitamins, sunscreen, small gifts, a bottle of perfume for my daughter-in-law Savannah, a linen shirt for Michael, a doll for my granddaughter. I wanted the trip to start with love. I even baked oatmeal cookies for the flight. That morning, I looked around my quiet house and whispered, "Thomas, we're finally going to see the ocean again." The taxi driver was young and cheerful. "Vacation time, ma'am?" he asked. "Yes," I said, smiling. "With family," he nodded. "You look excited." "I am," I said. I didn't tell him that my hands were shaking. It had been a long time since I had felt included. When we reached the airport, lights reflected on the wet road. The big glass doors opened with a soft rush of warm air. People hurried by, laughing, calling out names, dragging suitcases that clicked on the floor. I stood for a moment, breathing it all in, the sound, the smell of coffee, the movement. I felt alive. At the Sky Harbor counter, I checked my passport and ticket again. Everything looked right. Gloria Avery, flight SH-218 to Maui. I sat down near the gate and waited, my heart full of quiet joy. Then I saw them. Savannah came first, tall, elegant, her white dress neat, her hair tied high. She walked like she owned the place. Michael followed. Phone in hand, eyes tired but kind. I waved. "Michael!" "Savannah." He smiled faintly. "Mom, you're early." "Of course," I said. I didn't want to miss the flight. Savannah gave me a thin smile. "You look cute." "Mom, like a real tourist." I laughed softly. Not sure if it was praise or tease. Then everything changed. Savannah turned to the counter and spoke to the agent. "Excuse me. I need to confirm our passenger list for flight SH-218 to Maui. Savannah Avery. Michael Avery and Maria Cole." I blinked. "Maria Cole?" I frowned. "Savannah, who is Maria Cole?" She didn't look at me. "My aunt," she said. "She's coming with us." I felt a small sting in my chest. "And me?" I asked. "I'm on the list, right?" Savannah's lips curved, polite but cold. "Mom, there's been a mix-up. The resort has limited rooms and Aunt Cole really needs a break. You understand, right?" Her voice was sweet, but it cut like glass. Michael shifted, eyes on the floor. "Mom, the trip has a lot of activities. Hiking, boating. You might get tired. We thought you'd prefer to rest at home." I stared at him. "Since when am I not part of this family?" He didn't answer. Silence spread between us like smoke. The agent printed new tickets. Savannah took the paper, thanked her, and turned away. I watched as she crossed out my name. Just one small line, black ink. But it felt like my whole life erased. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Michael, please look at me." He lifted his head for a second, then looked away again. "Mom, don't make a scene," Savannah said softly. People are watching. You can stay home and water the orchids. This trip isn't appropriate for your age. Appropriate for my age. The words echoed in my head like a bell. Around us, people laughed and called to their kids, but I felt invisible, like a ghost walking through someone else's story. I sat down on a bench, hands shaking. Michael mumbled something about calling later, then followed Savannah toward the gate. Their figures moved farther and farther away until they disappeared behind the glass doors. And that was the moment something inside me broke. Not loud. Not angry, just quietly cracked. I looked around. No one noticed. To them, I was just another older woman at the airport, but inside, I felt my heart folding in on itself. I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, and took a deep breath. Thomas's old words came back to me. If one day they make you feel small, remember who you are. I opened a hidden app, the one he had left me. Sky Harbor Owner Access. My finger trembled as I tapped it. A message popped up. Protocol A12. Confirm owner identity. I pressed yes. The screen blinked. Verification successful. Welcome, Mrs. Avery. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. I looked out at the runway where a silver plane waited, the Sky Harbor logo gleaming on its tail. They were about to fly on my plane, be served by my staff, drink champagne bought with my dividends, and they thought I was a burden. I smiled, a small, quiet smile, not revenge, just realization. For years I had given, forgiven, stayed silent. Now, I remembered that silence is not kindness when it erases you. Thomas had seen this day coming. He had left me the power to stand tall when others pushed me down. I watched people boarding. Children giggled. Couples held hands. Friends hugged goodbye. I used to think family was a promise. Now I knew it was a choice, and they had chosen without me. That hurt. But it also freed me, because when someone shows you where you stand, you finally know where to walk next. A soft chime rang through the hall. Passengers on Sky Harbor Flight 218 to Maui. Please prepare for boarding. My son and his wife stepped through the gate. Never turning back, I whispered, "Goodbye, Michael." Then I added under my breath, "And goodbye to the old me." I texted a short message to the CEO. Victor Lang, activate protocol A12. Owner Gloria Avery, request special announcement on Flight 218. Within seconds, a reply appeared. Confirmed. Shall we address the passengers, Mrs. Avery? I typed, "Yes, let them know the owner is watching." I sat by the window and waited. Through the glass, I saw the plane taxi slowly across the wet runway. Light slid over its body like liquid silver. I felt strangely calm, like the sky itself was on my side. My phone buzzed. Announcement in progress. I put on my headphones, opened the cabin audio feed, and listened. A flight attendant's clear voice filled my ears. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Sky Harbor Flight 218 to Maui. Before we take off, the captain would like to share a special message. Then the captain's voice, smooth and steady. Today we extend our greetings to Mrs. Gloria Avery, owner of Sky Harbor Airways. It is an honor to serve you. I could almost see it. Savannah's smile freezing, Michael's eyes widening. Their new Aunt Cole whispering, "Who is she?" The passengers clapped politely. And me? I just closed my eyes and breathed, not out of pride, but peace. Finally, I wasn't invisible. A text arrived from Michael. "Mom, what's going on?" "They just said your name." Then another. "Mom, is this a joke?" I smiled and turned the phone face down. Outside, the plane lifted into the clouds. I watched until it became a small silver speck. I whispered, "Thomas, you were right." I didn't need a seat. I owned the sky. And as the engines roared in the distance, I felt the first wave of something new, not revenge, but rebirth. I stood, gathered my things, and walked out of the airport. Rain tapped gently on the glass doors as I stepped into the gray morning. A taxi pulled up. "Home, ma'am?" the driver asked. I thought for a second, then said softly, "No, take me to the Sunrise Cafe." He nodded. The car rolled forward, wheels hissing on wet pavement. I looked out the window at the blurred lights and whispered, "Gloria Avery is not done flying yet. The truth waiting. In that safe will make you believe again in your own worth." The taxi rolled through the wet streets as morning broke over the city. Soft light touched the windows of the buildings, and the rain finally began to fade. I sat quietly, feeling the hum of the engine under my feet. It felt strange, peaceful, but with a pull deep inside my chest. Like something was waiting for me, something old, something Thomas had left behind. The driver looked at me through the mirror. "You said Sunrise Cafe, right, ma'am?" "Yes," I said softly, but as we passed a corner, my eyes caught a familiar sign. It was faded now, the paint peeling, "Avery and Sons Trust Bank." My breath stopped for a moment. That was the bank Thomas had used for decades, the one he said held our future. I had not been there since the funeral. "Actually, could you stop right here, please?" I said quickly. The driver nodded and pulled over. Rainwater splashed against the curb as I stepped out. I looked up at the tall gray building. It wasn't big or shiny like the new banks downtown. It was quiet, old-fashioned, like time had forgotten it. A part of me felt it had been waiting too. Inside, the lobby smelled like polished wood and old paper. The floor gleamed like someone had been caring for it for years. Behind the counter stood a young man with kind eyes. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," I replied. "My name is Gloria Avery. I believe my late husband, Thomas Avery, had a safe deposit box here." He typed something on his computer and frowned slightly. "Do you happen to have the key, ma'am?" I reached into my purse and pulled out a small silver key. It had been on my keychain for years. I never knew why I kept it. It had the number A12 engraved on it. The clerk looked surprised. "Ah," he said softly. "Box A12. One moment, please." He picked up the phone and spoke quietly to someone in the back. Then he turned back to me. "Please, Mrs. Avery, follow me." He led me down a quiet hallway lined with framed photos of smiling customers from long ago. To my days, at the end stood a heavy steel door. He inserted his card and turned a handle. The door opened with a low hum. Inside, rows of small boxes lined the wall, each with a brass label. He pointed. "A12 is right here, ma'am. You may open it in the privacy room." I nodded and stepped inside the small private booth. The light above the table flickered softly. My hands shook as I slid the key into the lock. It turned easily, as if the box had been waiting for this moment. 2. The lid opened with a soft click. Inside was a simple brown envelope and a small leather notebook tied with a ribbon. On the envelope, in Thomas's familiar handwriting, were the words, "For Gloria, when you finally remember who you are." My throat tightened. I sat down and slowly opened the envelope. Inside were a few sheets of paper, old, yellowed, and covered in Thomas's careful writing. "My dearest Gloria, if you are reading this, then life has brought you to the place I always hoped you'd reach. A moment when you remember that love does not mean silence, and kindness does not mean forgetting yourself. You own more than you know. Not just Sky Harbor shares, but full controlling rights. The documents are in the second layer of this box. Use them only when your heart tells you it's time to stand tall again. And one more thing. Go to Maui anyway. Not to find them, but to find yourself. You'll know where to go when you arrive. The map is in the notebook. With all my love, Thomas." Tears slipped down my cheeks. Even after all these years, he was still guiding me. I lifted the notebook carefully and untied the ribbon. Inside were hand-drawn maps, little notes and pressed flowers. On one page, written in fading ink, were the words, "The Sea House, North Maui. Our beginning." I had never heard of it. But somehow, the name felt familiar, like a dream half remembered. I traced my finger over the words and whispered, "Thomas. What did you leave me there?" I spent the next hour signing a few documents with the bank officer. He smiled when I handed him the papers. "Mrs. Avery," he said, "you're the full owner of Sky Harbor Group now." I had no idea. "Neither did I said softly. He laughed kindly. "Well, sometimes life likes surprises, doesn't it?" When I stepped out of the bank, the rain had stopped completely. The sky was clearing, pale and wide. I took a deep breath and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Possibility. Wasn't just someone's mother or widow anymore. Was a woman with choices. And I had a destination. I walked to the travel office across the street. "Can I help you?" the agent asked. "Yes," I said. "I'd like a one-way ticket to Maui," she smiled. "Vacation?" I smiled back. Something like that. That night, I packed again, but this time the suitcase was lighter. No gifts, no hopes for approval, just clothes, my passport, the notebook, and Thomas's letter. When I closed the zipper, I whispered, "This time it's for me." The next morning, I arrived at the airport, the same place where everything had fallen apart. But now I walked differently. I wasn't waiting for anyone. I was choosing myself. People bustled around me, rushing to flights, hugging goodbyes. I smiled at them, remembering how small I had felt the last time I was here. Now, I felt like I was floating. The woman at the counter looked at my ID. "Have a good trip, Mrs. Avery." "I will," I said, and I meant it. When I boarded the plane, I looked out the window as the ground pulled away. Seattle shrank below me, gray and green fading into the clouds. I whispered, "Goodbye." The flight was long but quiet. I read Thomas's letter again and again. Every word felt like a heartbeat. At one point, I closed my eyes and saw him smiling, standing by the ocean, waving for me to come closer. When the plane began its descent, I opened my eyes to see blue. Endless. Shimmering blue. Maui. The air smelled like salt and flowers. The sun was warm on my face. I rented a small car and followed, the map and the notebook. The roads curved through, green hills and past old sugar fields. Finally, I reached a narrow dirt path that led to the sea. At the end stood a small house, weathered, with white shutters and a porch facing the ocean. The Sea House. I stepped out of the car and just stared. Waves rolled in gently, touching the shore with silver foam. The house looked tired but peaceful, like it had been waiting too. When I opened the front door, a gust of warm air brushed past me, carrying the scent of sandalwood and dust. Inside, everything was covered in white sheets. I pulled one away and saw a familiar piece of furniture. Our old cedar chest. I had thought it was lost years ago. Hands shook as I lifted the lid. Inside were photos, letters, and a small wooden box. The first photo was of Thomas and me on our honeymoon, standing on a beach. This very beach. I laughed softly. He had brought me back to our beginning without ever saying a word. Then I opened the wooden box. Inside was a single old coin, a folded piece of paper, and a small key. The paper read, "Look behind the piano." I turned slowly. In the corner of the living room, half covered by a sheet, was an upright piano. I pushed it gently, away from the wall. Behind it was a hidden panel. My heart raced. I slid the panel open and found a small safe built into the wall. I used the key. It clicked open. Inside were stacks of documents, company shares, property deeds, and one small velvet box. I opened it. Inside was a gold ring with a sapphire stone. I remembered it instantly. Thomas had worn it every day. I slipped it onto my finger and whispered, "You always had another plan, didn't you?" At the bottom of the safe was one more letter. It was short. "Gloria, if you are here, it means you finally saw yourself the way I always did. You never needed my name or my money to shine. But if this gives you strength, then take it. There's more. One final truth. Waiting at the Sea House dock, under the old lantern. Love, T." I walked outside. The sun was setting now, turning the sky orange and gold. The dock stretched out over calm water. I found the old lantern, rusted but still standing. Beneath it, nailed to the wood, was a small metal box. I pried it open carefully. Inside was a sealed envelope and a single photograph of Thomas shaking hands with a man in a navy suit. On the back of the photo were the words, "Trust no one named Lang." My heart stopped. Lang, that was Victor Lang, the CEO of Sky Harbor, the man who had replied to my message earlier that week, the man I trusted to protect the company. I unfolded the letter. Thomas's handwriting filled the page again. "Victor Lang is not your ally. He has plans to sell Sky Harbor to foreign investors. He believes you don't know what you own. Don't let him take it. Call attorney Rachel Miles. She knows everything. Her number is in the notebook. Tell her it's time." I gripped the paper tightly. The waves lapped at the dock, calm but relentless. So this was the truth waiting in the safe. Not just love, but warning. Thomas had left me power, but also a battle. I looked at the ocean and whispered, "All right, Thomas. You trusted me with this. I won't let you down." The wind lifted my hair as the sun sank below the horizon. For the first time in years, I didn't feel lost. I felt alive, ready. And that was only the beginning of the storm. The next morning, the sea was calm, but my heart wasn't. I sat on the porch of the Sea House with Thomas's notebook open in my lap. Seagulls called in the distance, and sunlight danced on the waves. Everything looked peaceful, yet I could feel a quiet warning inside me, like the ocean was holding its breath. I turned to the last page of the notebook. At the bottom, written in Thomas's careful hand, was a name and a number. Rachel Miles, 808-555-0926. Below it, he had written only 3 words. She knows everything. My fingers trembled as I dialed. The phone rang once. Twice. Then a calm voice answered. Rachel Miles speaking. "Rachel?" I said, my voice shaky. "My name is Gloria Avery." There was a short silence. Then her tone changed. "Mrs. Avery, I was hoping you'd call someday." I told her everything, the safe, the letters, the photograph of Victor Lang. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she took a deep breath. "Mrs. Avery, your husband trusted me years ago. He knew Mr. Lang might try to take over Sky Harbor after his death. I've been keeping files, like proof, waiting for your permission to act." "Proof?" I asked. "Yes. Documents showing Lang's deals with foreign investors. He's been preparing to sell off the company's assets quietly. You own controlling shares, but he's hidden that fact from the board." I felt a chill. "Why would he do that?" "Because," Rachel said softly, "he never thought you'd find out." I looked out at the ocean. The horizon was bright, but dark clouds were forming far away. Maybe it was going to rain again. "Rachel," I said slowly, "what do I need to do?" "Come to Honolulu," she replied. "We'll meet at my office. Bring every document you have, especially the letter that mentions him." "I'll be there," I said. I hung up and sat very still. The breeze brushed my hair. I thought about the woman who had sat crying in the Seattle airport only days ago. She had been small, scared, invisible. Now I was holding the truth in my hands, and truth is never small. I packed the notebook, the letters, and the photograph into my bag. Then I locked the Sea House door behind me. As I turned the key, I whispered, "Thank you, Thomas. I hear you now." The drive to the airport was long and winding. Palm trees leaned over the road like quiet guardians. When I arrived, the clerk looked up from the counter. "Good morning, ma'am. Destination?" "Honolulu," I said. "Round trip?" I thought for a moment. "No. One way." The plane lifted off, and Maui grew smaller below me, a patch of green surrounded by endless blue. I held the photograph of Lang between my fingers and studied his face. He looked confident, smiling beside Thomas, but there was something in his eyes, a shadow of greed maybe. Thomas must have seen it long before I did. Honolulu was busy, bright, alive. Cars honked, people laughed, and the smell of roasted coffee drifted from a nearby cafe. I found Rachel's office in an old stone building downtown. Her door was simple. Rachel Miles, attorney at law. She stood when I walked in, a tall woman with silver hair and clear eyes. "Mrs. Avery," she said warmly, shaking my hand. "You look just like Thomas described. Stronger than you think." "Thank you," I said, smiling faintly, "though I don't feel strong yet." "You will," she said. We sat down and I laid the documents on her desk. She opened a thick file drawer and pulled out a folder labeled Sky Harbor Confidential. Inside were pages of emails, contracts, and transfer forms. She pointed to one page. "This is a signed agreement between Victor Lang and an overseas investor group. He planned to sell 49% of the company next month, without board approval. Once sold, he could push you out entirely." I stared at the page. My name was nowhere on it. It was as if I didn't exist. Rachel continued. "Thomas warned him in writing that ownership rested with you, but Lang never filed that letter with the board. I have copies." She handed me another paper, a notarized statement signed by Thomas himself. It read, "In the event of my death, my wife, Gloria Avery, is to inherit controlling interest of Sky Harbor Group." Tears filled my eyes. "He made sure I'd be safe," I whispered. Rachel nodded. "But now, you must decide whether to stay silent or fight." I looked at her, then at the window where the city shimmered in sunlight. "I've been silent most of my life," I said slowly. She smiled. "Then it's time to speak, Mrs. Avery." She opened her laptop and typed quickly. "I'll draft an emergency notice to the board, declaring you as acting chairwoman. That will freeze Lang's transactions until a hearing, but it will also make him angry. Be ready for that." I nodded. I'm not afraid anymore. Rachel handed me the document to sign. As I pressed the pen to the paper, my hand was steady. With that single signature, I reclaimed my voice. For the first time in years, I felt my heartbeat move with purpose, not fear. When I walked out of Rachel's office, the air smelled different, like it belonged to me again. The city noise wasn't harsh anymore. It was music. Cars honked, waves rolled against the pier, and in the middle of all that life, I finally felt alive too. I found a small cafe near the corner of Bishop Street. The young waiter smiled as he set down my tea. "Rough day, ma'am?" I laughed softly. A good kind of rough. He grinned, not understanding, and left. As I stirred sugar into the cup, I watched the steam rise and thought about Thomas. He had always believed I was stronger than I knew. Maybe he saw this day long before I did. Maybe that's why he hid those papers, to make sure I'd one day find myself again. For so long, I had lived quietly, almost invisibly, in other people's stories. Michael's mother, Thomas's widow, Savannah's inconvenience. But that morning, in Honolulu, I realized something simple and bright. I was still me. And I had value, even if no one clapped for it. Later that evening, I returned to the hotel and opened my notebook. The room was small, the walls soft yellow, and the sea breeze came through the curtains. I wrote on the first blank page, "Today, I stopped being afraid of being alone." Then I added, "The world doesn't end when people walk away. Sometimes it begins." I closed the notebook and looked out the window. The moonlight fell over the water like silver paint. I smiled, whispering, "Thomas, I think I'm finally starting to live." The next morning, I flew back to Seattle. The sky outside the plane window was pale blue, streaked with white clouds. Each time the engine hummed, I thought of Sky Harbor, not the company, but the meaning. Harbor in the sky. A place where even broken wings could land. When I reached home, the house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt quiet, but warm. I brewed tea, sat at the kitchen table, and opened the window. The smell of rain mixed with jasmine from the garden. For once, the silence wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. That week, Rachel emailed me updates. The board had acknowledged my authority. Lang's deals were frozen. It was over. But instead of celebrating, I sat there wondering, now that I had my power back, what would I do with it? Power without purpose is just noise. And I had no interest in noise anymore. I started small. I made breakfast for myself every morning. Not the fast toast and coffee I used to rush through, but real meals, scrambled eggs, honey on warm bread, fresh fruit. Each bite felt like a small act of love toward the woman I had ignored for years. I began walking every evening, around the lake near my home. The ducks, the fading light, the laughter of strangers, all reminded me that life was still happening, and I was part of it. Sometimes I would stop and talk to people on the benches. A widower feeding pigeons, a young nurse reading a book between shifts. We'd share small stories that somehow felt big. Those moments were my quiet therapy. One afternoon, while walking home, I passed a community center. A sign on the door read, "Support Group for Older Women, every Wednesday, 6 p.m. I stood there a long time before walking in. The room smelled of coffee and paper. There were about 10 women sitting in a circle, chatting softly. A kind-looking woman in her 70s smiled and waved me over. "First time?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "I hope that's okay." She nodded. "It's more than okay. You're home here." We went around sharing stories. A woman named Doris spoke about losing her home after her husband died. Another, Linda, talked about her grown children who never called. When it was my turn, I hesitated. Then I said, simply, "I was once told I was too old to belong. But I learned that belonging doesn't come from someone's permission. It comes from knowing your own worth." The room went quiet. Then Doris reached over and squeezed my hand. "That's beautiful," she whispered. And for the first time, I didn't cry when someone said that. I smiled. After that night, I came back every week. Sometimes I brought snacks. Sometimes I just listened. The more stories I heard, the more I understood how many women carried invisible pain. They had raised families, built homes, and given their best years away. Yet when they grew older, people treated them like fading wallpaper, forgotten, quiet, background. I couldn't fix everything, but I could listen. And I knew listening, really listening, was a kind of healing too. One night, as I walked out of the center, I looked up at the stars. I thought of Sky Harbor again. I owned an airline, but maybe the real thing I owned was a chance to lift others. That idea stayed in my head all the way home. By the time I reached my driveway, I had decided I would build something new. Not for revenge, not for power, but for women like me, who needed to feel the wind again. I stayed up late sketching ideas on my notepad. The word second wind came to me in a flash. It sounded right. A second wind isn't about youth, it's about recovery. The moment when you're tired but keep going and suddenly find new strength. Yes, that's what I wanted to give others. A second wind. By sunrise, I had written my plan. A small fund, a few mentors, classes in finance, confidence, and legal rights. Not charity, empowerment. When I finished, I whispered to myself, "This is it, Gloria. Your new beginning." That same day, I called Rachel. She answered quickly. "Mrs. Avery, I was about to call you, the board's next meeting." "Rachel," I interrupted gently, "I'm done with battles for now. I have something else in mind." "Something else?" "Yes. I want to start a fund for women over 60, those who've been forgotten or dismissed. I'll use my dividends to seed it." Rachel was quiet for a second. Then she said, "Thomas would love that." Her words filled the room with warmth. "Yes," I said softly. "I think he would." That evening, I drafted the mission statement. The Second Wind Fund, helping women over 60 rebuild, reimagine. and reclaim their freedom. I printed it and pinned it on the wall beside my desk. The next morning, I woke up with energy I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't someone's mother or widow anymore. I was a founder, a woman building something with her own hands. The first donors came from my old friends. June, my neighbor, offered to help manage calls. Rachel helped me register the foundation legally. Within weeks, the website was live. Emails began to come in from everywhere: California, Texas, Florida, women wanting to join or volunteer. I read every message. Some were short, like whispers. I just want to be seen again. Others were full stories of pain and survival. Every line reminded me why I had started. At night, when the house grew quiet, I'd sit by the window and talk to Thomas in my heart. "I finally understand what you meant," I'd whisper. "You didn't just leave me money. You left me a mission." The wind outside would move through the trees, soft and low, like he was answering. The days passed gently after that. The foundation grew faster than I imagined. Every morning, I'd wake up to new letters and emails from women across the country. They shared stories of heartbreak, of starting again, of finding light after years of darkness. Each story was different, but they all carried the same truth. It's never too late to begin again. Sometimes I'd sit in my garden, reading those letters aloud to the flowers. It might sound silly, but it made me feel connected. Thomas used to say the earth listens when you speak with love, and I believe it does. One letter stood out. It came from a woman named Margaret in Ohio. She wrote, "I watched my husband build his dreams while I stood behind him. After he passed, I thought my story was over, but your words made me open a small bakery in my town. I sell pies again, and I laugh again." I smiled when I read it. I could almost smell the cinnamon and apples from her kitchen. That letter went straight to my heart. It reminded me that healing doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it whispers through small acts: a pie, a garden, a letter. I decided to travel, to visit some of the women who had written to me. Not as a boss or founder, but as a friend. Rachel helped me arrange it, a short tour across a few states. "Call it your gratitude trip," she said. I liked that. It sounded like exactly what I needed. First stop was Arizona. The sun there felt different, bold, golden, almost playful. I met Clara, a retired teacher who had started free reading classes for older adults. She hugged me tight the moment she saw me. "Gloria," she said, "you don't know what your story did for us." I laughed. Maybe I do now. We sat on her porch with lemonade, talking until the sky turned pink. She told me how her students came from all walks of life: widows, veterans, even a farmer who wanted to read bedtime stories to his grandkids. As she spoke, I realized something beautiful. My story had grown bigger than me. It was moving through others, carrying hope in quiet ways I couldn't have imagined. After Arizona came Texas, then Georgia, then Maine. Each place had faces, voices, laughter, women rebuilding their lives piece by piece. In every hug and handshake, I felt Thomas there, smiling somewhere, proud. One night, after a long day of travel, I sat by the hotel window and looked at the city lights below. I whispered, "We did it, Thomas. You planted the seed, and look how far it's grown." For the first time, I didn't cry when I spoke his name. I smiled instead. When I returned home, the house didn't feel big and empty anymore. It felt alive. The walls carried stories now. The garden bloomed brighter, as if it had been waiting for my return. I made tea and sat on the porch swing, letting the warm air wrap around me. The phone rang. It was Michael. For a moment, I just stared at his name on the screen. So much had happened since the airport. I didn't know what to expect, but I answered. "Hi." "Mom," his voice said quietly. Hi, Michael. There was a long pause. Then he sighed. I heard about the foundation. Savannah showed me an article. You've really built something amazing. Thank you, I said softly. He hesitated. I owe you an apology. The words landed like gentle rain. I was wrong, he continued. About Maui, about everything. I didn't see what you were going through. I thought keeping you home was helping you. It wasn't. I took a deep breath. Michael, I've already forgiven you, I said. Really? Yes, I said with a small laugh. You were young and busy. I was quiet and afraid. We both learned. He didn't speak for a moment. Then he said, Savannah wants to talk to you too. She's sorry. That's good, I said. I think we all needed time. He asked if he could visit next week. I smiled. I'd like that. When the call ended, I sat there for a long time, holding the phone against my heart. Forgiveness felt like sunlight, soft, steady and warm. It didn't erase the past, but it made the future lighter. A week later, they came. Savannah hugged me first. It was awkward at first. Then real, she whispered, I'm sorry, Mom. And this time, I believed her. We spent the afternoon walking in the garden. Michael fixed the swing that had been broken for years. Savannah helped me bake cookies. The air smelled like butter and sugar and peace. That evening, as we sat together, my granddaughter, Lily, climbed onto my lap. She looked up at me with curious eyes. Grandma, she said, is it true you own airplanes? I laughed. Something like that. Can I be a pilot? She asked. I smiled. You can be anything you want, sweetheart. Her small hand held mine, and I felt hope stretch far into the future. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat alone on the porch. The moon was bright, the air still. I thought about how much had changed. Once, I had been left behind at an airport. Now, I was the one helping others take flight. Life has a funny way of turning pain into wings. I closed my eyes and whispered, Thank you, Thomas. For the love, for the lessons, for believing in me. The wind moved through the garden again, gentle as always, and I knew somehow he heard me. Months later, the Second Wind Fund hosted its first national event. Women flew in from all over the country. We gathered in a large hall decorated with white lilies and golden lights. Rachel stood on stage and introduced me. When I walked to the microphone, applause filled the room. For a moment, I couldn't speak and the lump in my throat was too big. Then I said simply, Thank you. Not just for believing in me, but for believing in yourselves. I told them how every woman there had faced storms, but still found her horizon. I reminded them that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just waking up and trying again. When I finished, they stood and clapped. It wasn't for fame or power. It was for hope, and that sound filled me with a peace words can't describe. As the evening ended, I stood by the window looking at the sky. The city lights shimmered like scattered stars. I thought of the journey, from pain to peace, from silence to purpose, and I realized something. The horizon isn't a line where life ends. It's where new beginnings are born every day. I smiled, whispering to myself, I am still flying. Final reflection for your viewers. If you're watching this and you've ever felt forgotten, remember, your story isn't over. It's never too late to take back your voice, to find your second wind, to fly again. Because somewhere out there, your own horizon is waiting, and when you reach it, you'll see what Gloria finally saw, that every ending can be the start of something beautiful. When the sun sets at the end of a long day, we often think it's the end of something beautiful, but sometimes sunsets are just beginnings dressed in gold. If Gloria's story touched your heart today, take a deep breath and remember that you too, still have time to rewrite your story. You are never too old, never too forgotten, never too late to start again. So wherever you are right now, sitting at your kitchen table, driving home, or resting after a long day, just know that you still have your own second wind waiting for you. If Gloria's journey inspired you, please take a moment to like this video. It helps more people find hope when they need it most. And if you want to hear more powerful stories like this one, subscribe to this channel and turn on the bell icon so you never miss a new story about strength, hope, and second chances. Your support means the world. Together, we can remind the world that no one is ever truly forgotten. We all have a horizon waiting for us. Thank you for watching. And remember, your story is far from over.